Halos lumubog sa kinauupuan si Senadora Riza Hontiveros dahil sa sunod-sunod at matitinig na tanong ni Senator Francis Tolentino hinggil sa pagiging sponsor nito sa proposed budget para sa 2022 national election. Idineklara ni Senator Tolentino na maraming OFW ang nagrereklamo patungkol sa hindi di umano nabibilang ang kanilang mga boto ilang eleksyon na ang nakararaan. Hindi rin nilubayan ni Tolentino ang proposal budget o pagiging sponsor ni Hontiveros kung bakit niya pinababayaan na tila may ilang milyones sa national budget para sa darating na 2022 national election ang hindi naman mapapakinabangan ng sambayanang Pilipino. Ano ang dahilan kung bakit ayaw pakawalan ni Senator Tolentino si Hontiveros? Maaari bang hinuhuli niya ito sa mga tangkanyang pangungurakot? Ating alamin sa full report.
Through prior educational information campaigns. They were already included in that herd that were informed by the Commission on Elections. This is the same people who will also be informed and re-educated this coming 2022. Ang tanong ko po, bakit kagastusan pa natin ang voters education campaign yung na-educate na natin dati? There is probably a sound reasoning and basis if we increase the budget for voters education, if the 1,820,000 plus would increase to 2.5 billion, and then the difference would be the population that should be informed and educated initially by the Commission on Elections as to their overseas voting rights.
I completely agree, Your Honor, Mr. President, that there should be, in a way, value for money for any aspect of our budget, lalo na po yung budget ng isang pinaka-importanting constitutional body natin, tulad ng Commission on Elections, in terms of, mas marami pang voters natin na tuwing eleksyon ay lalahok at actually boboto. Although, Your Honor, Mr. President, yung ibinahagi ko pong mga numbers nila on spending for voters education would include both overseas absentee voters at tayo pong mga botante dito sa Pilipinas. Still, it leaves that question in our mind, why at least in that important component of overseas absentee voting, we are actually anticipating to suffer a 200,000 peso drop in terms of voter turnout. But maybe part of the answer, I will ask COMELEC for additional response to that particular point, Your Honor, Mr. President. But in terms of leaving the quantity aside momentarily, in terms of the quality or the content, perhaps election upon election, kahit po continuous ang voters education efforts ng COMELEC, baka po dahil din every election, Your Honor, Mr. President, given also the developments in the voting technology or demographic changes in our voting population, there are still new voters ed activities that need to be undertaken. Halimbawa po, Your Honor, Mr. President, noong 2019, ang voters education activities po ng COMELEC, kabilang dito yung conduct of vote counting machine demonstration, yung No Elections Better seminar, yung Women and Elections seminar, which this representation can certainly appreciate very much. And Your Honor, infomercials, yung Radyo COMELEC po, Mr. Chairman, which to its credit, the COMELEC has been running multi-sectoral anti-vote buying campaign, Your Honor, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, the reason probably for this continuing expenditure is that there is a need for likewise for a continuing information campaign.
Yes,
even
Mr.
if there is a drop in the number of voters. So,
and perhaps, Your Honor, Mr. President, pwede ko pong hingin sa COMELEC for the benefit of this representation and all of us as well na mga electoral reform advocates, perhaps there are differences in the demographics of those who would make up the total voters turnout in 2022. Kasama na po yung ating mga first-time voters. And syempre po, at tinanong din po natin ito nung committee hearing yung mga subpopulations within the voters population na gusto pa rin siguruhin ng COMELEC makaboto kahit dumadaan pa rin tayo sa pandemic, yung ating pong mga senior citizens and other immunocompromised citizens who however still must fully enjoy their right to vote, Your Honor, Mr. President.
I agree, Mr. President, but probably I would like to have this body note that while the Commission on Elections, I'm not against this, have existing resolutions relative to the vulnerable sector mentioned by the good sponsor, specifically Resolution 10634 in its Section 2, it is still, they are still given the same burden of going to the embassies to physically register. So it doesn't change the situation. While there is a recognition that they should have express lane, they should have a diaper change room, they should have a lactation of breastfeeding room, among other senior citizens lane, pregnant women lane. They still have to go to the embassy and travel hours to be able to register. So my next question, isn't there a program for being envisioned by the Commission to perhaps involve technology in the registration process, since we recognize these vulnerable sectors of our overseas kababayans? My example during the committee hearing was a person residing in Manchester who would have to travel several hours to reach the embassy in London just to be able to register, skip work, be away from the normal family daycare activities. Isn't there a technological approach to this? So yun po yan. I am not against this. My purpose here, Mr. President, is really to re-energize the overseas voting office of the Commission to think of other ways, given the flaws suffered by several jurisdictions in the recently held November 3 U.S. election. So hindi pa po sila nag-iisip ng ganon?
Thank you, Your Honor, Mr. President, for that encouragement and challenge to the Commission on Elections. His Honor is right that, for example, there was a time there were only 3 countries kung saan po yung ating mga kababayang overseas Filipinos ay pwedeng bumoto by mail sa ating mga embassy at consulate doon. Bukod sa mga kababayan natin sa Manchester, tulad ng sinabi nga ni His Honor, halimbawa yung mga kababayan natin sa Saudi Arabia ay talagang ilang taon nagreklamo na kailangan nilang mag-day off ng isang araw para magrehistro, pay cut, and then araw ng eleksyon, day off na naman, at ganun din maneho ng malayo o sumakay ng malayo sa ating embahada o consulate para bumoto, pay cut na naman. So let me, good gentlemen, ask the COMELEC now what are our ongoing and moving forward projected programs to address this. Your Honor, Mr. President, some initiatives would include iRehistro, which allows overseas Filipinos to fill up their registration application online. And secondly, Your Honor, Mr. President, another initiative is the COMELEC working with our Department of Foreign Affairs by sharing of biometrics, Your Honor, Mr. President. And just for the record, Your Honor, regarding the earlier question of His Honor, na-disaggregate na po ng COMELEC yung budget po para sa overseas voter education would amount to 10 million pesos.
10 million
10 million, yes.
10 million pesos for next year.
Yes, Your Honor, for next year, 2021.
And this would apparently include the travel expenses of those coming from Manila.
Yes, Your Honor, all in na po yung halagang yun.
What about the, you mentioned something about 3 embassies. What's this notion of heads of posts? Are these DFA officials or are these COMELEC officials temporarily assigned with our embassies?
Yeah, Your Honor, they are DFA officials, Your Honor.
This representation, Mr. President, would probably pose a legal as well as a constitutional question on this, because apparently, no offense to the Commission on Elections, the chairman is listening. You have a COMELEC resolution 10677, which authorizes the heads of posts, DFA officials, part of the Department of Foreign Affairs family, our diplomatic officials, they have the discretion to suspend, resume registration of voters, overseas voters. Am I correct in that premise?
His Honor is correct.
Yes. So we are now empowering officials of the Department of Foreign Affairs who are not officials of the Commission on Elections to extend the registration, to suspend the registration of overseas voting based on their discretion. And probably, is that correct? The current resolution of the COMELEC is that they can suspend, continue registration based on their discretion. Not COMELEC officials, but DFA officials.
I was also becoming very surprised, Your Honor, but the COMELEC has explained that that is a temporary measure given the COVID-19 pandemic. It is not meant by the Commission on Elections na maging kung permanenteng aspeto ng ating electoral exercises. Those remain by the Constitution under the mandate of the Commission on Elections, Your Honor, Mr. President.
So, having acknowledged that, I think there is really a legal dilemma here, because the heads of post can resume the registration perhaps February of 2022, or even beyond the deadline provided for by law, which should have been implemented by the Commission on Elections. So we now have a parallel COMELEC exercising utmost discretion in suspending, resuming voters' registration.
I have just learned something new and very interesting, Your Honor, Mr. President. Additionally po, COMELEC says that this temporary arrangement is aligned with DFA policy. Again, temporarily. So I believe, I think, Your Honor, Mr. President, that this is an important, as His Honor said, legal and constitutional question that the Senate is therefore raising both to the COMELEC and to the DFA, Your Honor.
Yes, Mr. President, because if the COMELEC can delegate the their election powers to another office, which is DFA is not a constitutional office, unlike the Commission on Elections, COMELEC can delegate it to DOLE. DOLE as a labor attaché. We now have a social welfare attaché. We have a military attaché. So what will prevent DFA from subdelegating it again to another office?
Your Honor, Mr. President, COMELEC reminds this representation that this temporary practice na arrangement po ng Commission on Elections at ng DFA has to be taken into context for pandemic times. Sabi po nila, so if posts need to close because the staff, for example, is COVID positive, they need to suspend temporarily. Ang pag-intindi po ng representation ito, Your Honor, Mr. President, ay such suspension or otherwise action on this electoral exercise na mandate ng COMELEC, but in such specific instances, exercise ng DFA ay dahil lang sa health grounds, not anything beyond health, anything actually, hindi lang po health, Your Honor, anything COVID-19 pandemic specific. So hindi po maaari dito sa kaayusan ngayon ng COMELEC at DFA, hindi po ito maaring tumawid or mag-trespass dun sa teritoryo ng COMELEC in terms of the broader electoral exercise, Your Honor.
Mr. President, Madam Chairwoman, there is a parameter, as implied. There are limits.
Opo.
Probably there is a time frame But what will prevent COMELEC now from delegating it again beyond your registration process to even voting process, canvassing process, counting process? Because they have now started the delegation process, which I think was hidden from the public eye. So
Okay,
what
His
will
Honor.
prevent them from doing the same if we still have a pandemic in 2022 or another epidemic? So what will prevent them since we now have a president here, Mr. President?
This representation will ask the COMELEC that now, Your Honor, Mr. President. But in the meantime, the COMELEC wishes to reassure the Senate that the DFA and the DFA only in such specific situations is a deputized agency, and it may not deputize or delegate this further. But on the other point raised by His Honor, and then to be very specific, and this representation stands corrected if I have been remiss here, the COMELEC reminds that they do not delegate, they deputize. So COMELEC has deputized DFA, and it may not deputize further. Your Honor, Mr. President, the COMELEC says that ito pong deputization nila ng DFA for registration and registration alone, hindi po tatawid sa oversee ng pagboto, ni pag-canvass o ano pa man, is a very specific agreement, and it has those limitations that His Honor, Mr. President, was raised. And if requested, the COMELEC may provide His Honor and the Chamber a copy of that very specific, I would guess, Your Honor, very strict agreement with the DFA.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. President. Just my last two questions. I promise the good majority leader that this will be short and happy. My last two questions.
Honor, if I may, before the last two questions, just additionally to the previous question of His Honor, COMELEC says in the same manner that they deputize public school teachers to run local elections. So very specific po dun sa dinedeputize-an, very specific din po sa tungkulin na ipinagagawa or idinedeputize, at yun lamang po.
That, with all due respect, my only concern there is that when we deputize a public school teacher, it is within the jurisdiction of our the Philippines, the Philippine government. We see the public school teachers, but we don't see our officers coming from the DFA abroad. We don't know what they're doing. Having said that, Mr. President, I now go to my last two questions because the majority leader has been asking me to make this short and happy. My question is, why isn't it that the COMELEC, is not tapping the Department of Labor's tracking system for all overseas Filipino workers? Para mapadali, you piggyback on the system being used by DOLE, mas madali nyo makakapture yung listahan ng ating mga kababayan abroad. Is that from our records, and this was also explicated by the good minority leader, it appears that we spend more for one Filipino overseas voter, 828 pesos, 0.81 for 2019 elections per voter overseas, as against a local voter, 391 pesos and 30 centavos. So, in case of apples to apples comparison, some are questioning why do we spend more for people abroad rather than for our local voters who are more interested in Philippine affairs. And I go to my final question, which is a suggestion. Can't we have a system, although I have here the transcript of the interpellation made by Senator Angara and Senator Pimentel years ago. Why is it that we can to really to really expand the coverage of the overseas voting system, why don't we include the congressmen? Why don't we include the congressmen in the ballot? In the ballot, COMELEC don't have a quick reaction to this. As similar to what the Overseas Voting Act of the United States is doing. It will generate the participation of our kababayans who are clustered culturally, the Batangueños, the Capiteño Association of LA, the Ilocanos of Hawaii, if they will vote for their congressmen. The Constitution does not prohibit that.
Actually, Your Honor, Mr. President, kasi sabi lang po ng COMELEC na it's in the law na ganoon po. So, kung kanina po His Honor raised a legal and constitutional question to COMELEC and even to DFA.
But the Constitution, Madam Chairperson,
baka yun po, pwede nating i-take note dito po sa Kongreso.
so it's in the law that they can vote for congressmen.
It is in the law, in the OAV.
Yes, only the national. I have the transcript. That's why I mentioned this a while ago. But the
Yes,
Constitution is silent.
or-
The Constitution is silent. It does not say that you can only vote for senators, president, and the vice president.
Wow.